Well, thanks everyone for joining us for the last Sifted Talks of the year in partnership with Remote. We're going to look at how to find, attract and retain talent in the current market, as well as discuss the top recruitment and hiring trends for the year ahead. So hopefully you'll all leave today with some tips in your back pocket of how to approach hiring for next year. On my panel today is Karen Brandt, Chief People Officer at Fin, Tim Chong, Co-founder and CEO of Yonder, Zoe Jervier Hewitt, VP of Talent at Sequoia Capital, and Pedro Barros, Senior Vice President and General Manager of Contractors at Remote. So before we kick things off, I've just got a few housekeeping bits. We won't have a dedicated Q&A at the end, but we will be taking questions throughout. So please submit questions in the Q&A box. These can then be upvoted and we'll discuss the most popular. So without further ado, I want to set the scene a bit first and look at what the state of the tech job market is. So maybe I can start with you, Zoe. Could you please just give us an overview of what's been happening in the job market over the last 2 years, given the turbulence of the economy and also the reduction in VC capital, and maybe explain a bit as well on what impact that's having on hiring?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So I think it's been a couple of years of fluctuation. I think we've still been seeing fluctuations this year in the job market. As you mentioned, a lot of companies that had to downsize in 2022 and 2023. And I think what we've seen this year is companies start to return to rebuilding teams and rehiring, which is great. But they're doing it in a much more thoughtful manner and a much more careful and considered manner. So there's this sort of movement, I guess, away from growth at all costs and adding all the headcount that you can possibly afford to one that is a bit more measured. And teams and founders are talking much more about concepts of talent density and how can we make sure we have got the highest concentration of top performers relative to our overall team size, which I think is healthy and correct, by the way. I think that what that means on the candidate side is it's still a tough time to change roles. I don't think there are as many opportunities around as there were maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago. But actually the quality of opportunity is probably higher because of this more sort of considered hiring approach. And also the candidate experience is better. I think when companies are, moving a little slower and really taking their time to decide who they need in a role, candidates tend to have better experiences going through their processes.
Thanks, Zoe. Tim and Karen, maybe you can kind of weigh in on that and explain a bit how maybe the current environment has affected your hiring decisions, maybe versus pre-2021. Are you also being more cautious and deliberate when it comes to hiring?
Yeah, we definitely.
You go, Karen.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, we have definitely slowed down and have been much more considerate, more thoughtful, as Zoe mentioned. We can absolutely underline that it's what we see. I mean, we see it across the board that we have become more cautious. However, in the key roles that are key to our success, we still are also struggling to find top talent. So it depends also where you look, that we see a slowdown in some areas, but also in other areas. For example, we in finance or in some very specific niche kind of roles, we are also struggling to find top talent. And this is also what we see, where we really have to stretch ourselves in terms of have a really attractive offering, not only financially, but also on the non-financial side.
We've sort of gone the opposite. It's quite weird. We started sort of 2021. We were a pre-product market fit sort of early stage company. And I think my philosophy, even when the market was quite frothy, was capital or people don't solve product market fit problems. Ultimately, you need a small team who are 7 to 10 people who are just rigorously and just rarely focused on finding product market fit. And so even when we did sort of our fairly large sort of seed and pre-seed round early on, we sort of kept a team headcount of 7 to 10 people for the first 15, 18 months. I wonder if that kind of flips now, and it's quite nice that the market is tougher on the candidate side, but from our side, it's a lot easier to find great talent now as we're starting to ramp up our hiring now. And we're sort of finding we've tried to really think about hiring in the lens of what does the company need and what is the constraint of the company, rather than what is everyone else telling you to do, because the thing we've always really worried about is sort of this flip-flop of hiring where you ramp really aggressively, you realize you've hired too much, you have to do huge redundancy, which does affect morale, it does affect productivity, it does affect throughput. And actually, a lot of the time, I think we've all realized this, is that a lot of problems aren't solved by like throwing more capital at the problem or throwing more people at the problem. It's like right people, right time, right roles. And so we've sort of kept that philosophy. And then ironically, we're taking another approach where we're actually ramping hiring a lot more. And over the last 12 to 18 months, we've hired a lot more in the last 18 months as we started to feel a lot more confident in product market fit. But I also do recognize that it was very difficult because the general rhetoric at the time was capital is there, you need to get ahead. The way to get ahead is to deploy your capital in hiring. And it's even somewhat created through the way we talk about fundraisers, which is I'm raising capital to hire this many people. And we've associated hiring with capital raises, which I think is maybe not always helpful. And I think this has been a great time for the market for us to think about like what's the objective of capital raising? Is it to hire more people? And then secondly, how do we start to think about hiring at the right time when we need it, rather than hiring when capital's freely available, and then doing huge amounts of redundancies or pulling back hiring when capital sort of dries up as well? Because I actually think it's actually tough on the talent that we really need to like respect as well. And I think it's something that I think I take like with a lot of responsibility as well, and something we've been thinking a lot about over the last sort of 3 years.
We've
Yeah,
seen
I think, Tim, you sorry, if I may just build on what Tim was saying, that when you were mentioning overhiring, and I think this is something where we haven't had to do any layoffs. And also when I look back and how we try to do it is, I think because as you said, it brings a lot of negative, or has a lot of negative impact on the existing employees, is that we really try to first, before we look at do we need a person, can we automate, can we become more efficient, make our tools more efficient before we then even hire a person. So we always keep trying to do that. We are really cautious and identify the roles that we need to hire for, and only go ahead with the most pressing and immediate business needs we see, not only now, but also the business needs we think will still be there like in a year from now. So that we won't do any opportunistic hiring, just maybe we might need the person. And what also worked really well is that we try to sometimes hire maybe a level below, so that we always have the opportunity to develop the person into the growing role over the years, and also with that retain the person longer and keep the role attractive for that, because they can develop and grow in the role.
I think one of the rhetoric shifts I've seen even at a founder level is it used to be the bragging right was how many people you had. And now the new bragging right is revenue per employee, which I find has been quite an interesting change at like the classic Twitter threads of how people talk about their company as well. I hope we don't overcorrect the other way. And I think that's the really tricky balance, is making sure we don't overcorrect the other way. And we tend to, as a industry, overcorrect too far either direction. But I just find it interesting that has become the rhetoric now, which is revenue per headcount versus number of headcount.
So when we talk about sustainable hiring, how can companies actually assess when is the best time to hire, rather than having this ping pong effect, as you described, which is you raise money, you hire a load of people, maybe then you have to lay them off? Like, how can companies keep it at like a more level kind of playing field?
I think it really needs to be tied to the goal at hand, or the strategic initiative. I think a healthy way to design hiring plans is to start with the vision you have for building out, whether it's, I don't know, expanding into a new geo or launching a new product, but starting at that sort of initiative goal-based level, and then kind of working backwards from there. Because I think historically companies, when they've received a cash injection, would say, okay, how many people do we want to add to finance? How many people do we want to add to marketing? And I think that sort of blanket approach doesn't work any longer. I think it really does need to be tied to the objective at hand. And in that respect, some objectives will be more experimental and more, new territories to explore, and it may not need a fully baked team. It might be a team that you can maybe hire flexible talent into. And I think that's another trend we're seeing, actually. There are just more ways you can bring people into your organization, and different types of hiring that exist now.
Yeah, and I think your point, so it connects well with Karen's point in terms of the sustainability of hiring versus automation. So do we really need these individuals? Are these individuals like long-term investments, or is just a small project that needs flexibility in terms of workforce, like a small contingent workforce for a project? So I think we're seeing a lot of need for flexibility into how we approach hiring. So a lot of specialization, for example, but we're also seeing a lot of push for sustainability, not only from the company perspective in terms of automation and using the most recent technology that can leverage the capacity of individuals, but also how permanent these roles will be in the organization or not. Because I think we've seen over the last 2-3 years is that we've made significant changes in terms of what is really needed and what is a must-have versus the dynamics of hiring just because I have more capital and I need to deliver what was my promise in terms of adding more people to add more capacity to do something that, as Tim mentioned, probably you don't even have product market fit to deliver. So I think there is a very different approach today.
I think one thing I find interesting is that no manager ever says I have enough people. Like no team ever says I have enough people and I have enough budget. So if you start with the question, how many more headcount do you need? You will always get more headcount requests. No, barely any manager will say, I have enough. Don't worry about that. And so I think it's a really interesting dynamic because if you think about it, everyone will always say they need more people and everyone will always say they need more budget. And so then like how do you kind of like reconcile that and go like, well, then what do you actually need at a first principles? And that's the thing I always hold back in my mind is like no one will ever say I have enough.
Yeah.
I think the second thing I think a lot about is like proportional hiring based on like confidence. And so if we've got confidence in something, we then double down and hire more there. But if we're still exploring something, I think to your point around Zoe, around like flexible talent, like we might, if we're testing a new marketing channel, we might work with like an agency first or freelancer. And then we've got like signal that it's really working, then we'll double down on hiring. Now, I will say there was a risk there though. The one challenge we've seen for us in practice is that by the time we see signal, it's now taking us time to hire them. And so there are times where I like regret waiting to see confidence because to find great talent takes time. And so sometimes it's taking us 3 to 6 months to hire that person. And I feel like I'm getting behind. And so I think that this is where there's a real tension, right? Because I think ideally you wait until you see confidence, but then we are in a rocket ship building business and you don't want to wait either. And so I think that's where there's a bit of inherent tension where yes, being sensible sounds great in theory. In practice, when you take 6 months to fill a role, it's really frustrating. And then you kind of I wish I put that higher when the person came available. You know, like I think, Karen, to your point, you do less opportunistic hiring, but then there are occasions where I'm like, oh, I should have done the opportunistic hire because now I really need them today. And so that's something that we're sort of reassessing constantly and sort of, kind of challenging our own sort of heuristics on how we think about it, because I think sometimes it breaks. And we've seen that time for us where we've been great in that we've rarely ever hired a role that we didn't need. But then sometimes we've taken a lot longer to hire the role when we've needed it. And that's been a bit frustrating, for me as CEO, being like, I want to hire that role now.
Just on that, Tim, I think that point is so important. I think every hallmark of a great leader, a great CEO, a great founder is that they are a talent scout and they really understand that talent scouting is a long game. And so there should be, a kind of growing list of people that you want to get to know over the years that you may not be able to hire today, maybe not even tomorrow, but you have time in your schedule to meet, even if it's 1 or 2 people every so often who are exceptional in their field or in their function. So that when the time comes and you realize the signal and you need to hire, you need to press go, you can reach out to that person and they might be available, but they may also just open doors to their very talented networks of great people. And I think that can shorten the time to find someone excellent, but you really do need that like talent scout mentality.
That's totally great advice. I'm going to write that down. Thanks.
We've got a question that's come up. There's a lot of candidates looking for roles at the moment. How are you handling the challenge of sifting through the flood of applications to find the right people?
Look, we receive thousands and thousands of applications. As you can imagine, today Remote is a 2,000 people organization. So for every 50 roles, we get maybe 15, 20,000 applications. It is massive. Or sometimes we have just to close it very, very quickly. I think today you have tools that you can leverage to accelerate understanding of the applicants that you have. But so far, we are still not rejecting applicants based on AI, for example. We use that to enhance how we approach checking for CVs and the profiles of individuals. But we still rely a lot on the human side to understand if it's the right people or not, to ensure it's aligned to our values, to ensure it's aligned to the initiatives that we have in DEI, for example. So it's still quite important to understand that there's still a lot of bias in the models that are out there, and we are still not very confident in those to reflect the values of remote. So it's a combination of technology, but human as a final touch.
What we are trying to also leverage is like a cognitive ability test. But as you say, and we have the same view, it's not bias free. So it's additional data point, which can help to, if it's, for example, a high volume pipeline where you do the test at the beginning to help you screen out, maybe if you're faster, screen out candidates, always knowing that you might miss the candidate who without the test could have been the perfect match, right? But given the high volume we also get for some of the roles, we see this as a valuable tool, or like coding challenges, or these kind of things which we try then to do at the beginning of the process, so that we can then also filter out and see the candidates who are willing to invest the time and really have an interest in the company and joining us, but also we get more insights in their capabilities and their skills, and this is also proven quite helpful.
Another question from the audience. What are the best methods to screen for culture fit?
Oh, this is a nice one. I have very strong views on this, sorry. Remote has people in 90 countries. So culture is what we embrace. Different cultures is what we embrace. I'm asked this many times, like, how do you do it? And especially in a remote setting, etc. So for us, we do it in a different approach, and I have been hiring a lot at remote, which is values alignment, because we want to embrace different cultures. We want to embrace folks coming with their ways of working to hit the ground running and to have the highest impact possible in the different ways that people work in different places in the world, and even with different cultures. But what we put a lot of emphasis on is the values alignment, and these are public, so any candidate can check this out, and we push it to the candidates. So we have a handbook, even how we communicate internally, and how we operate, how we document things, how we work asynchronously. And we try to focus much more on these, like in terms of values alignment and the capacity of the individuals to operate in a remote setting efficiently, rather than trying to hire folks which are all the same culture, because I think that's impossible in a 90 country span.
Yeah, one of the things that we call it a values fit, not a culture fit, because to your point, we're pretty multicultural in our team, just in terms of ethnicity and like nationalities. And so the first thing I always said is, like, the values fit is not a pub test. It isn't about, do you want to hang out in the pub? That's like your group of mates. That's not how we hire, because there are a bunch of great people in our company that you may or may not want to go to the pub with, that are great values alignment. And so I think the thing we've always said is, like, it's not a pub test. I think the second one, I guess a couple of sort of things to layer on. The first thing I always say is that most people are like terrible at interviewing, and you have to like train for it. And I think I even still remember the first time I interviewed someone 10 years ago, and I was terrible at it. And I realized that a lot of the time screening's hard because we also don't teach people how to interview. So we say, here's like a document, go and do a culture fit or values fit interview. But the act of knowing how to ask questions, and I always say, like, the goal of an interview is almost to be like detective. You really want to like understand, like pull on that thread, and that's a skill that's developed. And so the rule that we have is you have to do values fit training, like, which is a 2-hour workshop. You then have to practice with one another. You have to give feedback to one another. And then before you're eligible to do it, you have to do values fit with an experienced interviewer as well. And then we always want one of the founders. We're sort of early to growth stage, but we have always one of the founders or management team involved in one of the values fit as well. We've got sort of people who are like experienced values fit interviewers. They always pair with less experienced people as well, because what we're trying to build is like calibration in like how do you evaluate values. And then the third thing I always say is I would always rather the team go deep rather than broad, meaning you don't get values from just asking, so tell us a time about this. Like you need to go like, tell us why. How did you feel about that? Why did you do that? What made you upset about that? Why would you do it this way? And because I think we found that a lot of the magic comes from the pulling of that thread and going much deeper. And that's what we've found. We've had to do a lot of training with the team because there's a natural tendency to say, oh, we have these 4 values, bam, 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 let's tick them off. And I'm like, that's not values fit interviewing. That is ticking boxes. What we really understand is like get under the skin of how someone thinks and how they work. And on occasion, if we don't feel like we can sort of hit that aha moment, we'll say we're going to do another values fit interview again, like a round 2, because we just don't feel like we have confidence on that. And so far, it's been really valuable. And then we've actually looked back at when things haven't worked out. Let's go back to the notes from the values fit interview and let's see like where can we triangulate where our calibration was off, where can we work on the process as well. So I'm just thinking about it as a product as well. It hasn't been perfect, but it's overall it's been really, really positive for us, and we've found the team have also really enjoyed engaging in the process, as really thinking about the values themselves as they're doing the interviewing as well.
Yeah,
I love that.
Sorry.
I think I was just going to add, I think specifically to that point, Tim, about the importance of the interview. You should definitely probe on people's decisions that they've made throughout their career, but especially like decisions why they left a company. I always find really interesting to spend some time on, and that you'll probably hear like the rehearsed answer first. But if you really kind of just keep digging a little, or why they chose to join another company, I think that says so much about a person's like values and the way that they think about their lives, and that will translate into hopefully values that you can write down on paper and see whether that fits with your company or not. But I think sometimes in interviews we're scared to like ask that second why question or third why question, and that's when you get the real insight.
What we are also trying and push our interviewers for and try to educate them is also not to just quote unquote look for the fit, but also for the culture add. And we don't want to only have people that rather like mirror our existing traits. We want people who enhance them, who diversify us as a company in our culture, and that we are always ask them to remain open, to look, what else is there? Is it really an ad, or is it merely like a mirroring of what we already have? And this is something, it's always hard to get to, but we really try to push and educate them on. And I think the cultural questions, not cultural, behavioral questions or situational questions, and then always probing and go deeper there is always very helpful in really understanding how the people can add the value.
So I just want to move on to speaking specifically about where companies can actually look for talent practically, because we talked a bit at the beginning about how it really is a struggle to find this talent and find these top performers. So where can companies actually source candidates, and are there any tools that help with this?
I could talk maybe early stage, and then the more qualified people can talk about when you're professionalize your talent function. I think very practically for that really early stage is like networks. Like nearly all our first 10 hires came from networks, past people we worked with. And I think the reason being is because to join an early stage company is slightly insane. You sort of like, you take a lot of risk, but you need the best people who are willing to work really long hours and get paid not a lot of money. So like the Venn diagram of people who fit that criteria is like unimaginably tiny. And therefore you kind of need to like ask people who are looking for this. Because I think the flip side is though, there are people who are looking for these types of roles and there aren't many available. So you kind of got to find them, but the Venn diagram is like really, really small. And so we did a lot of networking. We had one random who came through Angel List, which is very random. But in general, everyone came through networks, and it was because like you needed someone who saw the opportunity and said, I love the idea of getting paid 50% less than my current job, getting equity that could be worth a lot, but could be worth nothing. I love the idea of working 70 hours a week, and I love working with really great people. And there's like a super weird niche set of people, but there are people who just love that. And we've always found you don't find them through a job ad, or we haven't anyway. We've always had to find them through people being like, because at that point they're really joining you as a founder. They're not joining a company. They're joining you sort of on this expedition to go on like explore the foreign land, and you're trying to find an expedition team saying, come and be on this expedition. I think that said, we've definitely found that changes definitely as you get bigger. And I'd imagine, Zoe, Pedro, how you have much better sort of solutions as you get larger, because that doesn't scale. You also don't want pure expeditionary people anymore. As you start to scale, you need professionals and operators. And so, but one thing I found is at early stage is being really clear on, this is what you're opting in for. Do you get excited by that, or do you not? And if you don't, like, you're not a good fit, because this is sort of an expeditionary type team. But it has to change, and we've had to think a lot about how does that change as you start to scale the company.
Yeah, totally agree. I think in those early stages, that's exactly the type of talent you're after. And I think there's trade-offs you're willing to make at that stage as well. You don't have to have all the experience in the world, as long as you've got the hunger, the drive, you really buy into the mission. I think as you're probably going through now, Tim, as you grow, that does change slightly, because one, your networks become exhausted. So actually you've kind of hired all the best people from your networks, and they're not going any further than that. But also you'll probably need to start adding more specialists and senior talent. And actually the ways that you find those people and the recruiting methods tend to look a little different, because you have to be a lot more targeted. You may have to go into pools that you've never been in before, so you don't know how to calibrate to what great looks like, and so you might need some help with that. And so I think over time, the way that you hone in and find the best people is to, one, do your research, especially if it's like a new function or a new field that you've not recruited for before. I think we see this a lot in some of the go-to-market roles, because a lot of the founders we invest in are brilliant product and technical geniuses, and their networks are very heavily kind of product and tech. But then as they start to add on more revenue building functions, that is kind of new terrain for them that they need to learn. And so I think, one, understanding what great looks like, understanding what revenue leadership, for example, looks like at your stage and looks like at the next stage is really important. And I think if you have investors, then you definitely lean on your investment team to help you with that. I think the other thing is not being afraid to go further afield and kind of move out of your local, home turf, and maybe look at other geographies, especially if it's specialist talent. There's so many hubs across Europe that are known for different things. And so I think if you're building an AI company and you've exhausted your AI network in London, then look to places that are also hotspots for AI. And places like Dublin have a disproportionate amount of AI engineers, but you may not think straight away about Dublin. So go and spend some time in other ecosystems where you can meet great talent. And I think that it's a case of kind of doing that on repeat.
And what kind of tools are useful? We have a question here that says, based on your experience, what are the best tools for sourcing candidates besides LinkedIn and Sales Navigator?
Tricky question. I can have a go. It's not like the active sourcing, but in a way it is. The referrals, go to your employees and ask them, do you have anyone in your network? As we also just heard a bit. I think this is very key, and the quality of candidates we get through referrals is very high. And also then retaining those people once then they join us is also a much higher chance, I think. And that's at least what we see and what I've seen in my career. So this is one part. And then I think it also depends on the job, the profile we are looking at. So we always play around with the different platforms we have. And also the tenure or the level we are looking at. If it's right out of university, it's a different social media platforms. We would go then, I don't know, try TikTok or YouTube, I don't know, and go out there and look more there than maybe on LinkedIn. If it's more tech, it's a different platforms we would use there. Or finance is also where we maybe in German speaker, we go on German platforms, maybe more so. So it's always very specific. What we try to do in order to find out which platform is also look at what do other companies do who look for the same type of role. And we go onto their platforms and their websites and look, oh, where do they post these roles the role I'm also looking for. And then we also try to get ideas how they do it. And this is also like a good source of information or maybe inspiration.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Karen. I think, but first of all, I think you can source someone from anywhere. I've even sourced someone from Airbnb before, not the company, like actually as a host on Airbnb. So I think like be creative with where you might find great people depending on the role you're looking for. But I would say absolutely taking that company-led approach. And I think the questions we often ask ourselves is when we're trying to get to know great people is which companies are doing a really great job at hiring the best people and top performers, and which ones did a great job maybe, I don't know, a couple of years ago or a few years ago, where that talent maybe now kind of the company may not be doing as good a job or standards have slipped, and actually the high performers may be looking to leave. And so we really love this concept of being able to hone in on a company's golden years. For every, you know, household name, there would have been a golden year or golden years period where the very best talent on the market were joining that company if they did a good job at building, you know, strong teams, and finding out, you know, which years are those years, and then trying to target employees that were there during that period of time. Now, to be able to do that and get the insight, I think you need to talk to people. You need to talk to people and get some firsthand insights on which companies do people aspire to join, or have people aspire to join, or where are their smartest, most ambitious, hardworking friends working.
So you mentioned in our pre-panel discussion that some founders are actually getting to know the profiles and people they want to target ahead of approaching them. And my question is, you know, if startups are going after like a particular experienced hire or profile, how can they actually approach this person and pitch themselves? You know, like if this person has been like in a big tech role or corporate, hasn't done startup before, especially, you know, what can startups actually say that's going to persuade that person?
Yeah, so yeah, I think firstly, power of a warm introduction if there is one available, but let's assume there's not. I think it's really finding a cold outreach works brilliantly well, but I think the thing that will get a seasoned, experienced executive to talk to an unheard of startup founder is the mission that they're on and the size of that mission. We always ask founders, you know, what's the scale of your ambition? And I think being able to have a great answer to that question and have that in the outreach is probably the thing that I would advise doing. And even if you share no other details about how you're going to do it and what the product looks like and, you know, the roadmap ahead, I think kind of putting together a really compelling and crisp outline of, you know, the mission or the problem you're seeking to solve, or your unconventional view of, you know, the domain or the future that you're building in. I think that kind of pitch works in the first instance. And then obviously once, you know, you get them in on a call or meet them for a coffee, I think it's about having that, you know, compelling story to tell in person. So I'd say like storytelling is never underestimate the power of a good story being told in recruiting.
I've always found like a side thing from it as well is one, it just helps you start to calibrate what good looks like. And I think that's the biggest thing that I spend a lot of thinking about, which is how do I start to articulate with what good looks like, especially in a function that I'm not expert in. And so I found, well, I think to Zoe's point, like a lot of smart people actually want to give advice. So that's also quite useful as well. Like people want to share opinions and advice. And so in general, I found that most of them I've been through warm introductions, but people want to share their thoughts and perspectives, and they're always generally really helpful. But the second like unintended positive effect is you start to calibrate what does like an exceptional X look like, and I've noticed that the more and more I do that, I start to build a bit of picture of exceptional people. First, they start to think about these questions. They ask me these types of questions, which is useful in itself. Two, they sort of have a certain pattern, so you start to then get a pattern of like, oh, all the exceptional people tend to focus on these things. Interesting. That's what exceptional people look like. And so, especially that I've found in a scale where you have to start hiring people where you're not good at it yourself, it's actually really hard to build the sort of the heuristic to figure out what good looks like unless you meet lots of these people. And so, as much as possible, I've been trying to make sure, on this a good reminder, Zoe, to continue to do it, to like just meet people, even when you're not hiring, even when you're not even thinking about in the next 12 months, but just to, because if nothing else, you learn a lot, you build up a talent pipeline and you also can calibrate what good looks like.
And I think that's the thing to remember, right? There's loads of good people out there, but it's like, how can you distinguish the good from the great? And so the more a founder especially can help themselves really target and hone in on like the really great people, the better. And even if you don't have time to meet them, I think you can get into that habit of asking your trusted advisors or investors or people in your network who is excellent for XYZ, and just start building up the list and then seeing, you know, where all the arrows start pointing. I'm sure arrows will start, you know, converging towards, you know, just one or two people, one or two names, and then, you know, have that person on your target list to get to know.
So I want to move on to talking about how to actually attract talent. And I want to start by talking a bit about employer brand. It's a bit of a nebulous term, but in terms of actually helping people find you and understand more about your company, the values, the culture, whatever, how can companies actually, you know, create an employer brand, but then also make sure that it's out there, visible for people to see?
I have just one contrary thought on that, related to that, but not the exact specific thing you're asking, is one of the things I've always asked our team is we don't want to be attractive to everyone, because I think there's this general feeling of you want to be the most attractive brand. I'm like, I want to be attractive to certain types of people and unattractive to other types of people. And one of the, I think there was a moment maybe about 2 years ago, we were still like finding product market fit and early scaling where we did our people site. And I'm like, it looks too good. Like we're now attracting people who think we're like this professional run company and we're 15 people and this is actually too good. So I had to like scrap it down a little bit almost, because we started to attract people who are looking for like a professional workplace. And we weren't. We were 15 people. We were just finding product market fit. And actually, the early days of having almost just like a Notion page with my email address was good, because you found the people that wanted that. And so we created this initiative called Compel and Repel, which was like compel these people and repel these people. You know, I said I want to repel people who want to work a 9-to-5 job. I want to repel people who just want to do their work and go home and just do what their job is doing. I want to repel these people who, you know, really just want to like take a salary and go home. Like these are people I don't want them, and I want our company to be as unattractive to them as possible. And then the people who are like want to work really hard, want to work on interesting things, want to learn new things, want to be challenged, want to take ownership and share in their ownership. I want to attract them. And so we've been thinking a lot about employer brand is not necessarily about how do we get it out there, but actually how do we get it out to the right people and actually scare the people that don't want that, because actually it clogs up your applicant, your ATS, with people who aren't the right fit. And then also, if worst case you filter them in, they do sign in, like opt in to join your company. They end up leaving in the first 3 months because like this isn't what I signed up for. And so I started to think more about almost this as like to an extent almost like a matchmaking exercise rather than marketing per se, of like let's get everyone into this thing, but going no, this is a find the right fit type approach, not a attract everyone in there. But you know, I think it's like slightly contrarian, because I think people think about employee brand as make it as good as possible, make it as attractive as possible, help reach as many people as possible. And I do think it actually clogs up your applicant process a lot more, and you can get attracting a lot of people that you don't want.
It's interesting that you're saying that. I think this is something that can also shift over time. I entirely buy into the like you repel also like the people you might not want to need or you might not need at the moment, but this can change because we saw that also that we are a high performing company. We want people also, same as you said, not only stop working at 5, they continue, they go the extra mile, have an entrepreneurial thinking. But we came to a stage where we had more like admin-focused roles and only admin-focused roles or operational roles where we just couldn't also pay the salaries if we wanted to get the talent that, you know, has this entrepreneurial thinking and goes the extra mile. So we also had to shift there and also have a like a mission and a statement out there that also appeals to those who want to close their laptop at 5 and be done with working, because also we needed those roles as well at some point. Not at the beginning, but over time, it also we also had to attract those and keep retaining them. That's also like the balance now we are challenged with.
On the employer branding side, we did something really cool recently, which is, for example, removing the minimum required experience for a role. And this resonates massively with people because it removes that pre-requirement of or expected like academic proficiency or whatever, and resonates massively with candidates that they feel more I don't know, integrated already in the full employee life cycle, and it worked out quite well.
I just want to touch on compensation as well, which of course is a big part of a employee offering. Zoe, how would you say that attitudes towards kind of cash and equity have changed on the candidate side?
Yeah, I think it's changed a fair bit actually, even in the last year. So I think as a result of the sort of macroeconomic environment, taking a turn, we've seen more candidates become a lot more sort of cash sensitive. Just as companies have become cash sensitive, I think kind of compensation in terms of base salary has become a lot more important to candidates, and that was not true for the 5 years or 10 years beforehand, because I think what we saw, we historically have run sort of candidate surveys to get a pulse on the market and just to try and gather insight about sentiment, and I think we saw like purpose and meaning and all these other things go to the top of the list of what people were looking for, and compensation was right down at the bottom. And actually we've just seen that start to bubble up to the top again, just as times are harder to live and people have commitments. I would say that the slightly concerning thing is that the equity component that makes up a lot of startup compensation, we're seeing growing ambivalence or returning ambivalence, should I say, in Europe about that part of compensation. It's not to say that people don't care about equity. Of course, it's always going to be an important instrument in the compensation in privately held companies. But I do think that we're perhaps not making as much progress as our sort of US counterparts on really selling that as the sort of most meaningful part of upside in a candidate's compensation package. And I think that's just because, one, it's obviously longer term in nature to see the payout from. Two, we're still looking for those like really big outcomes in the ecosystem that sort of prove that equity is worth something, and I just think we just haven't had enough of those examples, but hopefully some will be coming. And so I think that what it means for founders and hiring teams is that in this current market, in this current talent market, they're just having to work a little bit harder at sort of selling and educating on that piece. But to Tim's point, I think there's also this question of self-selection. So I think in the early days, you only really want to be hiring people that are there for the mission and sort of a long-term minded about how a company can accelerate their career. And so if they are really turned off by the idea that a large part of their compensation package is going to be equity related, then I think they're probably not the right person for your stage of journey anyway.
How can companies actually assess what is most important for their stage of company, but also like the state of the market?
Yeah, I think we often talk to founders about during the interview process, and ideally before the sort of you get to the last checkpoint and the offer stage, somewhere throughout the interview process, asking, trying to delve into candidate motivations as to why they would want to join your company, and sort of categorizing the answers that you hear by, are they motivated by, wallet, or are they motivated by mind, like brain and the intellectual challenge, or are they motivated by heart, if they're so in love with your company? And so I think trying to upfront get a clear view on candidate motivation is really important, because then when it comes to just offer negotiations, you're in a much better stead and you're much more aligned with whether that person's going to be right for your company and for your stage. But at the early stage, I would say that you only really want to be hiring people that truly buy into the big ambitious vision, and therefore are okay with taking, not receiving a huge salary. I think the interesting thing we saw in the last couple of years is that obviously a lot of people were laid off from big tech companies, and those people were applying to join startups and earlier stage companies, but they actually just could not meet them because of the compensation requirements. And a lot of them were just not willing to budge from taking a really high salary and taking a larger equity package. And so I think it created this sort of, stalemate in the ecosystem almost in the job hunting market.
What we are also trying to do is to address these trends you mentioned, is that we try to have more customized offers out there. So maybe let's say, okay, lower cash, higher equity, or higher cash, lower equity, so that we have a bit of a flexibility there, or that we try to play around, I don't know, with the vesting periods, or have a shorter cliff for example, so that we try to be a bit more nuanced in what we are offering, depending on, like, the candidate, the motivations, and also how, on the other side, how desperate, of course, we also are to get this right hire into our doors. And then another thing is what we try to also highlight is non-monetary benefits. I don't know, like well-being perks, gym or mental health tools that we're offering, parental care, parental leaves, etc. So these things is also something we always try to add and show the full package and not just focus on the cash or equity component.
I think that's actually really important because whenever anyone joins a company, it's an exchange of value, right? You're hiring that person for their skills and their talent, and they're getting something in return. And I think it's not always about the monetary value exchange. I think it's ideally you are selling and pitching someone on how a set period of time at your company, whether that's 2 years, 4 years, 10 years, is going to accelerate their career and going to, have a meaningful impact on their life. And I think if you can really craft out that pitch to the person and make it very unique to them and what they care about, then you'll have a great chance at closing them.
Yeah, I actually like that way of framing it. I always say is like, we are stewards of our team's time with us. Like, they don't have to choose to work for us. And the reality is they won't work for us their whole life. So we are like stewards of a period of time within their career to allow them to grow and be their best in that period. And like I always say that, I want your time with us, however short or long with us, to be the fastest growing period of your career. And you might decide in a couple of years' time that you don't want that for personal reasons, and that is totally fine. But what we want to do is steward that time and then like really act as a steward. And I think it's like an old school word, but I really do think that's the mindset that we want to take, which is like, we do have to like be really respectful of people who've chosen to work for us. But what we're feeling is like, there's a reciprocation, right? And we're really upfront being like, look, we don't expect you to be here for your entire life. Like, you're 25, you're not going to be here for the next 50 years. But what we do want to do is like make sure we really respect whatever period you give us, to make sure it's like the most rewarding and great time in your journey to grow as well. Because I think money is a factor, but I do think that especially, a lot of senior engineers can get paid in many places. They are looking for more than just pure cash. Like, you can just be a contractor earning cash if you want just pure cash. What they are looking to do is like meaningful work, to grow, to work with a great team. And so I don't think it's an excuse to underpay, but I do think that our goal is always like, we want to always make pay never the reason you join or leave, if that makes sense. So it's just like it's just like it's enough that you don't even think about it. But we also don't want to be paying like an investment bank where you're like, I'm here because I'm here for the money, but I really don't want to be here, because I think that's also net worth as well. Plus we can't afford that pay anyway.
Before we go on to talking about retention for like the last 10 minutes of the conversation, we have a few questions on how to get started with hiring your first employee, and a practical approach is appreciated.
I think Tim mentioned it's all about networks, and if you have the infrastructure to hire them as employees, why not? I don't think you should be afraid of doing so. Obviously, if you need someone super specialized for a specific initiative, go with a freelancer or a contractor, but your initial team is super relevant, at least for a certain period of time. I'm not going to say that it's forever, but for that initial period of time, like that passion, that drive for impact is critical. But it's always through your network or investors network, but you need to tap into these close communities to you.
I think it's like a bit of a philosophy question there. I think everyone's got a different philosophy. I don't say the universal truth I would say is that if you're two co-founders, your first employee will represent 33% of your culture. That's it. That's fact. When you hire your employee number two, they represent 25% of your culture. So I think about it through the lens of each person you hire, especially the early stage, represents a disproportionate percentage of your culture. And so gotta keep that in mind. The second truth is they will have some input on your subsequent hires, Therefore, their disproportionate impact on your culture will not just be on the culture of 4 of you in a room, but actually the next 10 hires you make. Because ideally, they will then hire the next 10, 20 people. And the only way we can scale our hiring is we have a trusted set of management team or people that we really trust to hire as well. Now, does that translate to freelancer? Does that translate to like young energy who will just hustle versus more experience? That I think is probably unique to philosophy of you as a founder. I personally like hiring sort of at that middle management, sort of like not super senior executive because I don't feel like they can get their hands dirty, but also not too inexperienced because I need to give them autonomy where I don't need to day-to-day manage them. But that is like a philosophical question. But I would say the universal truth is that they will represent a disproportionate amount of a culture, whether you like it or not, either by just sheer like maths of number of people and percent of people they represent, and two, that they will influence how you hire your next couple of people as well. And so that has a whole bunch of implications on how you think about how you want to hire them, where you find them, and things like that. But we always sort of hold that universal truth into how we hired our early team. You know, I think we've been really fortunate. Like most of our early team are still with us. The other one of them's gone off to start another company, which is a great thing for us as well. But we always feel like they are huge cultural carriers for us and help scale our culture. But we spent an insane amount of time. I think we interviewed like 60 to 80 people to get our first per hire. And so we, you know, I think our first 3 months was just interviewing. And that was something that I told our investors, like, if you want to invest in us, this is how I will build the company, which is talent first, then product, which is a little bit contrarian. But I think it's also personal philosophy. I don't think it's right. I think it's just personal founder philosophy.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the only thing I'd add to that, and this might have been your experience, Tim, but I'd say that the sort of co-founding hires, or maybe that first hire, is probably the closest to dating as it gets in hiring, because so much of what you're testing for at that super early stage is chemistry, and that's really hard to gather from an interview or a set of interviews. I think actually what you need is sustained time working together. And so one of the things we see some of our portfolio founders do is, you know, put a time wrapper around it, let's say 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but say to someone, you know, let's see how we work together for 4 weeks, and then let's evaluate at the end of the 4 weeks how it's going. And I think you do kind of need some, you know, commitment and structure around that very initial test period, because if it's not working, it's unlikely to get better if it's not been working in the first 4 weeks. So I think it's you just need to have that sort of level of maturity on both parties to say, like, this is not the match, but, you know, good luck and move on to the next one.
I think what is also important and key in order to make the hire successful and is that you have, and the founder, that they have clear expectations of what they want, like what the role is they want to fill, what the impact is the person needs to have, and then the skills they need in order to get there. If they're doing too much trial and error and like trying to find out what exactly they are looking for, it's going to be like a lot of waste of time for them and also for the candidates or the potential hire you make. And if it needs time for you to figure that out, I would go with a freelancer or with freelancers at the beginning and then see, okay, what are the types of the people, the roles, the skills I need, and then go out and hire once you have a clear picture of what you need. And that will save you a lot of time also with interviewing and talking to people.
Thank you, everyone. We've got about 7 minutes left, so we'll do a quick rundown on what's important for retention, given that it's so hard to hire people. What really works when it comes to keeping employees in your organization?
I think
We haven't found the silver bullet yet, I think. But when we are trying to understand is why are people leaving, and we are doing structured exit interviews, talking to the people leaving. We are doing stay interviews so that we talk to them when we think they might be at risk of leaving. And what we found there is that they want a clear development path. They want a clear development role. They want to learn on the job, especially if the growth potential in terms of going to the next level, going to the next new role, bigger role is not always there. When you slow down a bit in growth, is that they still want to grow. as a person in their career. And this is what we are focusing now on, is to equip and educate our people leaders to be able to help their teams and their team members grow. And we really try to work on we have career development framework so that they know what is the career path I have, what is the next step. They understand what are the skills and the deliveries they have to do, or the what do they have to achieve to get to the next level. We try to have clear individual development programs with each person, where they look at what motivates me. Why am I here? Is it still there in this role, or should I look somewhere else in the company? And we try to support internal moves so that they can grow across different units, for example. And this is something where we really try to focus on this. Like if you say, look at the 70-20-10 approach in terms of how they learn, it's like the 70 is on the job learning and growing in order to address the need and the ask to additional growth opportunities as one of the main reasons for exits and leavers.
One thing that we think a lot about is like, what's a good leave and a bad leaver? Meaning, like, what's the reason we're happy for someone to leave and not? Because I think sometimes there are many. We've had probably about 8 people leave us out of 50 over the last 4 years, which is like not bad. And then 2 of us went to start companies and raise venture capital funding and start companies. And I'm like, tick, go and like do that. Like, please leave and go and do that, because I don't want to hold you back. Some of them have left for personal reasons, where what we required of them did not match with what their personal life required of them as well. And I'm sort of like, actually, I want you to leave and thrive and find a better place where there's a better match as well for this stage of where we are and what you need in your life as well. And then there were some where I consider bad leaving, where, you know, we did a bad job setting expectations. They weren't happy with compensation or a cultural issue. And so firstly, like, I divide those into those two buckets, because I think we think about them quite differently. I'm not a people expert, but I would say the best unscalable hack we've done, and we're 50, so we're quite small, is like, founders go and speak to people. So me and the 2 co-founders, we go and like skip level with the entire company twice a year. We'll basically try and speak to everyone, and it's not perfect, but a lot of things we want to hear is just like, what's the feedback? We obviously do surveys and we do all the standards that are pulse check things, but I just want to like hear, how are people doing? It is totally not scalable, by the way. But especially when you're early on trying to build out the right framework, we've sort of figured out like, this is like the short-term hack, at least while we figure out what's the scalable way of doing it. And we've found that a lot of the times just listening to people and hearing them is like incredibly valuable. Like, a lot of the times people just want to be heard and understand, or be able to ask questions to one of the co-founders, being like, why don't we do that? And I'm like, oh, we did it this way. And they're like, oh, I'm so glad you took the time to explain it to us. Now, that will not work with 1,000 people, so I have no opinion on how to do that at that point. But it's something that we think about, of like, our hack right now is something unscalable, but we can do that. And I think especially for early stage companies that don't have a huge people function and don't have the capability yet, what you do have is yourself, and human skills and empathy, and to get to know people as people.
Yeah, I think that's entirely right. I think there's probably just a handful of things that really drive retention, and I think what people really want that work for a company is, number one, connection, that connection to the business, as you were just speaking about, Tim. Also connection on like how their role maps to the mission, and I think sometimes that gets lost as the company grows so fast and evolves. And I think that constant reminder of like how an individual's role maps to the greater mission is important. I think they want challenge as a second thing, and so it's important to constantly allocate them to the most challenging growth opportunities and most challenging projects. And lastly, I think they want to be surrounded by high quality talent and high quality people that perform at a high level. And so actually on that last one, I think that's where many companies fall down, because they don't address and tackle underperformance proactively enough. And that is actually such a key part in retaining your top performers. So I would say that as a sort of area of opportunity, generally speaking, I think most companies could take a sort of more proactive approach to moving people on that maybe are no longer the right fit for the team or that stage of growth.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to have to wrap up here. So thank you to everyone in the audience who came, and I'm sorry if we couldn't get to your question. Thank you to the fabulous panelists. This has been a really great wrap up on the year of Sifted Talks. And thank you also to our partner Remote for their support.